Welcome everybody to Strategy Now here at MarketStream.live. My name is Joseph Cusick with the Cusick Group, securities offered by MoneyBlock. Here to give you the wrap up right now coming into the midday, and it has been rapid. The broader market began today's abbreviated week because of the Martin Luther King holiday lower. NASDAQ fell 29 points so far, down about 0.5% at 55.44. You're seeing that the S&P 500 is down about 5 points right now. That's about 0.2% at 22.69, and the Dow Jones is trading at a loss of 45 points, down 0.2% at 19,841. And the Russell 2000 continues to lead the way to the downside today, down about 12.27. That's almost 0.9% at 1359.80. Now, the action has come into the midday on lower volume, so we're not seeing strength in the sellers, either on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. Right now, about 323 million shares are traded in New York and roughly around 762 million in the NASDAQ, off of its average levels of 347 and 806 respectively. That's millions of shares. Now, the decliners are outpacing the advancers, but we do see that new highs continue to outpace new lows. On the earnings front, this is what set the tone. Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley came in. They beat on the top line, the bottom line. Good earnings. But they started to succumb to some selling pressure right off the bat. Down $1.51 right now. One thing that's notable, and you can go back and check my math, but on the 13th in Tech Talk, we talked about Morgan Stanley in advance of earnings. And we saw that the options were pricing in the potential for Morgan Stanley to move either up or down $1.55. Well, folks, it moved $1.51 so far today. So we were right within that 3.5% range that we were calling for. That's pretty good stuff. You got to check that out. Check my math. I'm on tape. No one else is doing that in this media space. Now, with that being said, there's the retreat on the sell on the news type of action here on the earnings announcements in the financials. We're going to watch this really closely because the financials have moved about 20-25% as a sector going into Q4. So there could be some profit taking coming into what's going to be a definite volatile new presidency. Now, we saw some action in United Health. We talked about it this morning on the open. United Health is trading down $2.47 at $159. It lost about 1.5% despite the fact that they had positive earnings reports. We talked about United Health in the Sunday night setups, which we actually did last night. The options we're pricing in for the next 3 days, really, a 6-point range or 3.7%. Well, it's moved half that amount right now. So we're going to keep an eye on this. The healthcare space as a whole seems to be having some selling pressure, especially after the comments after this weekend from President-elect Trump that restated his claim that, hey, guess what? Drug companies are going to have to renegotiate with the government on their drug prices in Medicare and Medicaid. We're going to see these pressures. We're going to see these tweets. It's all going to come to fruition. Volatility is going to have to start picking up in my mind. But we'll have to see because it's not doing it right now. This also weighed on the biotech space. IBB is down $5.18. That's 1.9%. That this isn't a volatile space, but we want to keep an eye on that, especially since we're continuing to see these tweets come out from President-elect Trump. Conversely, we continue to see the consumer discretionary space actually to the upside today, up about 0.3%. XLY is the ETF that you can look at. And basically, it's from Trump's statements that came out about the border tax, basically saying that anything that's going to be manufactured outside of the United States is going to have a border tax of 35%. He's voicing his concern that the current GOP border tax plan is just too complicated. And this is giving some hope right now to some pretty beat up manufacturers as well as retailers here in the United States. They've been taking it on the chin as of late with this potential tax on imported goods. We'll see if this is actually going to come to fruition or not, with the fact that Trump is basically saying, hey, we need to refigure this and make it simpler. The ETF XRT, which tracks retail, up about 85 cents at 44.85 or 1.9% pop on those headlines. We also did see in the close, the UK markets, Prime Minister May, who basically said that there is still the action of removing themselves from the EU on the docket, but there is an aim for more of a flexible approach. And they're going to phase it out a little bit differently than just cutting all ties in April and triggering Article 50. It's a very interesting and not fluid situation right now. As a matter of fact, the way that it sounded by the time she was done talking at 9 a.m. Eastern time was, the fact of the matter is they could still vote down this resolution in Parliament. In other words, they may vote to not remove themselves from the EU. So this is not a fluid situation. This puts strength in the euro, the British pound, as well as we started to see strength in the yen and the yuan. Now, for those of you that can't trade the futures and the future currency options on those, if you're interested in looking at the British pound, look at FXB. That's up 1.6%, and that tracks the British pound. That's an ETF. The Japanese yen, FXY. That was up 1.4% so far today. That tracks the yen. And then the Chinese yuan, CYB, up about 0.8%. Those are three ETFs, currency ETFs that you can utilize in your portfolio if you want to actually track and or trade those underlyings and you don't have access to the future or the currency markets. Crude oil did benefit, though, from the fall of the dollar. The greenback's weakness right now, getting right around that $100 level, has added about 0.8% to crude oil, up around $52.79 a barrel. That's helping the energy sector in general. Also, you're getting headlines that Saudi Arabia will abide by the production cuts that was agreed upon in December with the OPEC and non-OPEC nations. You're seeing industrials under pressure, materials under pressure, and technology all in negative territory right now into the midday. On the counter-cyclical side, we want to take a look at this. Staples up 1.2%, XLP. Utilities, XLU up 1.1%. Real estate, VNQ up 0.6%. They're all trading in positive territory. And you have telecom services sitting flatline. So you have a little bit of, let's say, a conservative trade or maybe a little bit of protection going on here, getting into these more conservative counter-cyclical areas. Treasuries have come down from their session highs on price, but still remain relatively high. The 10-year is still down about 6 basis points at 2.34%. Now that yield curve flattened some, and on the back end, outperforming the front end. The flattening is contributing to the weakness that we've seen in the financials, especially in spite of the fact that they've had pretty good earnings so far. But we're going to watch that closely. One other thing that I wanted to point out was the relative weakness that I've seen in copper. That does raise some red flags. If we continue to see that copper has some weakness, we're going to want to see why and where. Most notably, if we start to see the weakness and it's really coming from China, as well as the fact that we're waiting on what are going to be the infrastructure stimulus packages that are going to be coming through from the Trump administration. JJC is down 3.1%. That has weighed on the markets in the metals. Other than that, precious metals and steel have been moving to the upside, especially gold. Gold with the dollar weakness has bounced pretty considerably. We're going to keep an eye on that. Also, softs, commodities have been moving to the upside as well, especially since we've seen some red hot CPI data that's been coming out as of late. Most notable one is CPI data out of the UK was a lot higher than expectation. So if we're starting to see inflation rearing its head early, that's going to put some pressure on seeing some big growth names as far as what's coming out in the future, as well as watching some of these programs. All right, folks, I'm going to be back on at 3:30 Eastern Time with Tech Talk. Join me. I'm going to be covering the next set of stocks that are coming out with earnings. If you want to know their ranges, join us. See you at MarketStream.live.